That's the job. It's not a science. You have to be able to make hard decisions based on imperfect information, asking men to carry out orders that may result in their deaths. And if you're wrong, you suffer the consequences. If you're not prepared to make those decisions, without pause, without reflection, you've got no business being a submarine captain.
Independence will mean war. From one end of the colonies to the other.
I can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration, communist indoctrination, communist subversion, and the international communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids.
Several months ago, a foreign policy expert on the international level went to advise Donald Trump, and 3 times he asked about the use of nuclear weapons. 3 times he asked, at one point, if we have them, why can't we use them?
I still think we ought to take the dice on now. I think for that drown people, we have to drown well, no, I'd rather use a nuclear bomb if you got that ready.
I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportion. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Today, as part of an international coalition of some 60 nations, including Arab countries, our men and women in uniform continue to fight against ISIL in Iraq and in Syria. More than 2,000 coalition airstrikes have pounded these terrorists. We're disrupting their command and control and supply lines, making it harder for them to move.
Plausibly live, from the Podcast 99 studios, located in beautiful downtown Manteca, California, this is the Dave Bowman Show. Now, here is your submarine qualified, well-coffeed, stuffy, rules-driven, history buff of a host, Dave Bowman.
Hey, welcome aboard, cheese lovers. It is me, Dave, and it is Plausibly Live, the official podcast of the Dave Bowman Show. You want to join me, 565-DAVE, or dave@thedavebowmanshow.com. A loqui conitio, stand up. Tell those who oppose liberty, don't tread on me. As I said, we're doing some things differently today. I paid a lot of money to take a webinar on improving podcast stuff and marketing and that sort of stuff. And one of the things they wanted us to do, more than anything, was video. Apparently video is the be-all, end-all now of podcasting. It's not my thing, I will tell you up front. Video just not really what I like to do. But I spent the money, and so I'd be foolish not to at least try to do what they explained to us to do. So here we are. For those of you that are watching on video, you already know this. For those of you listening, there's a video of this podcast, which gives me the chance to kind of throw in some other stuff and do grand hand gestures and see the stuff behind me on the wall, as opposed to just hearing my voice drone on and on. I don't know if we're going to do a lot of this. I will tell you this week is going to be a very busy week. We have Ben is out of school, not out of school, but half days all week. Got one daughter moving out. Got another daughter who's just had some dental surgery. So things are a little, I'm knocking things off my desk. So things are a little weird right now. This week is going to be really, really kind of up in the air, and I'm going to apologize for that up front, but I may only get 2 shows done this week. And with normally doing a podcast doesn't take me that long to do, to sit down, record, put it all together, upload it, a couple hours. I've got that easily invested just in installing and getting the video software to work. So this could be a much more involved process if we're not totally careful here. So that's kind of what's happening in my week. Things got a little weird, I guess, for me this week. And I'm gonna say this up front. I'm the hawk here. Okay? Let me say that again. I'm the hawk. I'm the guy that believes in having a strong military, that deterrence works. I'm the guy who believes all of those things. I'm the guy that believes that we should have nuked Afghanistan on September 12th, 2001. All this pussyfooting around has done for the last, 16 years has killed a lot more people and cost a lot more money than what would have happened if we'd have dropped one 40, 50, 60 kiloton weapon on September 12th, 2011. Now, I recognize the fact that there are political penalties to be paid when you're using a nuclear weapon. I understand that. I understand that there are moral objections to it. I understand that there are difficulties with these things, and I get all that. Believe me, I understand all that. But when you're thinking about the concept of war and the purpose of war and what you're trying to actually accomplish in war, you need to be a little bit more broad-minded, I think, in some of the realities of what you're trying to do. Something happened to this country along the way that's really bothering me today. I've said this before. It's been bothering me for some time. If you go back to my blog the day after the election, I talk a little bit about the fact that I'm deeply concerned about this concept that we seem to have developed, which is war without end, war without declaration, and war without end. And it just keeps cycling over and over and over again. And we don't seem to have any realistic plan, methodology, way to move from this to a peacetime economy. And in some ways, I think what Eisenhower said was right. The influence of the military-industrial complex. But I think he missed on something too. He was right about the influence, the undue influence, whether sought or unsought. But in so many ways, the military-industrial complex has become the military government industrial complex, or the military is the government. I get that, but even more than that, the congressional military industrial complex. I mean, there's some real incestuous relationships here. I don't really care who your congressperson is. I don't care. Man, male, female, what district, what state, doesn't matter. Your congressperson, whatever party they are, your congressperson is deeply, deeply in bed with some defense systems somewhere. And when you get right down to it, that little screaming you heard in the background there is Ben. And that's what I'm really worried about. The future of a world where combat has just become continuous, expected, and in some ways downplayed because it's become normal. It's become back page. I mean, for the last 8 years if we go back to the last 16 years, so we had 8 years of Bush. Every day you open up the newspaper. Here it was the local SOB. There was a page on the paper that said how many people were killed, how many people were wounded, what was going on. For 8 years, then that went away. Now that's going to come back. I'm almost sure. I don't read any hard copy newspapers anymore, but I just don't have time. But I'm pretty sure that you can probably find that kind of information there, especially as things ramp up. And President Trump has made it clear that he intends to ramp up the military. Article in Stripes today talking about the fact that he wants to increase spending. The New York Times is reporting this evening, last evening too, that expenditures for the military are going up, while everything else is going down. Now again, I'm a military person. I believe we should have the best and the most. And unfortunately, what we tend to get a lot of is the most, whatever benefits a congressperson. The F-35 is a great example because the F-35 is made in basically every congressional district in the country has some finger in the pie of the F-35. And that way they're able to defend it congressionally and get the funding for it by appealing to every congressperson saying, look, you need to support it because it's jobs in your district. And you don't want to you don't want to lose those jobs, do you? This is what Eisenhower was talking about. This military-industrial complex that runs amok sometimes, and certainly is now. I am concerned because I feel like there's no willingness even to begin to think about these things. And this goes back to we the people not doing our jobs. When we the people are allowing our treasure, our talent, to be spent on endless conflict without our approval, without our engagement, we have a problem. When we're told, go shopping, that's how you fight the war, we have a problem. We're being misled. But worse than being misled is the fact that we're allowing ourselves. We want that. We don't want to hear about the nuts and bolts of what's going on. We just want to know who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and what we're going to do about it. And that's it. That's all we want to know. And anything that distracts from that becomes problematic. It becomes an issue for us. And that's where we've got to draw ourselves back into this. Now, again, I am not saying that we should not fight ISIS. It's been decreed that today, as of today, it's ISIS. I am not saying that we shouldn't do that. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is there's a process by which we do these things. And that process is being subsumed, and with it, our liberties are being subsumed. Dave, how are our liberties being subsumed by fighting ISIL? Well, who's paying for it? Whose money is going to pay for this? In the Bush years, the war budget was the war money was done off budget. Remember that? It was just borrowed and done off budget. In the Obama years, it was just printed. But at some point, my son, who you just heard run back and forth down the hallway again because tonight, for whatever reason, he cannot be quiet. And he's, not going to be in school tomorrow, so I have to do this now. Somebody's going to have to pay for this at some point in the future. And maybe that point is closer. Maybe it's farther away. I don't know when that point is going to come, but I do know that it's going to come because it has to. It always has. And unless somehow or another we figured out some kind of miracle, and I know a lot of you believe in Trump, but I don't believe he's a miracle worker, we're going to have to figure this out. And what we've done here is we've created a scenario where we've maintained this intensity, this combat of intensity that's just gone on and on and on since basically 1973. Really since 1950. Although, we had a kind of a dry era there from 53 to 66 or so. But that was only because the presidents hadn't figured out what they could and couldn't do yet. The Constitution is very clear. Congress declares war. Congress says yes, no. I'm reading a book entitled The Illusion of Victory. It's America in World War I. And the first few chapters deal with President Wilson's speech in which he asked for the declaration of war against Germany. Now, if you know anything about that war, yesterday was the anniversary of the Zimmerman telegram, which was really the straw that broke the camel's back in a lot of ways. The unrestricted submarine warfare, all these things led to the idea that the United States needed to go to war against Germany. Now, there's a lot of cultural things that I wish we had time to get into. We don't. But the constitutional element of that was that the president then went before a joint session of Congress and asked for a declaration of war. Now, you might think that much like in World War II, when Franklin Roosevelt went before Congress on December 8th and declared it a day in infamy, you might think that there was, resounding cheering, and there was. And you might think that there was a sense of patriotism, and there was. But what there also was a organized resistance to the idea that we needed to get involved with something that didn't really affect us, which was the war in Europe, the Great War. And there were many in Congress who believed, well, I shouldn't say many, there were at least 8 in Congress who believed that this was a bad idea. And while immense pressure was brought on them publicly, privately they were able to organize a little bit, and one of them was actually able to filibuster the declaration of war against Germany during World War I for at least a day, day and a half. He was able to postpone that in the hopes that clearer heads would prevail. They didn't, and off we went completely unprepared to World War I. In World War II, of course, we had been attacked. It was a little bit different story. When World War II ended with the last declarations of war by the United States against Germany, Japan, Italy, Hungary, Romania. I don't think we ever declared war on Finland. I don't remember. But I know that those minor German allies were some of the last declarations of war that we made. When the war ended, those were the last and final declarations of war ever made by Congress. 5 years later, in June of 1950, the United Nations authorized the use of military force on behalf of the United Nations, part of which was the United States, almost all of which was the United States. And all of a sudden, United States troops were thrown into a conflict against the sub-allies, the minor allies, I guess, if you will, of both China and Russia at that point, into a war that the United States had not declared. Just let that rattle around in your brain for a minute. Now, whether you think the war was necessary or not is not the point of argument here. If United States troops were going into conflict, should not the Congress of the United States have said, yeah, we're cool with that? We hereby declare war on you, North Korea? But we didn't. And 13 years later, 14 years later, we started sending advisors, you know, the air quote thing here, advisors, to South Vietnam, where eventually it morphed into yet another combat scenario. General Westmoreland came back and asked for a large increase in troops, and the president, by then Lyndon Johnson, agreed to that. Congress continued to fund it, but nobody ever took the time to say, North Vietnam, we declare war on you. We're coming after you, North Vietnam. We're going to get you. Under Nixon, who, if you heard the clip there, it's one of the more rare clips ever heard of Nixon. And it's hard to understand, and I hesitated to throw it in there, but Nixon is talking about how to defeat the North Vietnamese, and one of the things he wants to do is bomb the dikes that hold, like the levees here in Central California, keep the water from flooding. But he's concerned. How many people will die if we do that? And the estimates are somewhere, from Kissinger, somewhere between, a few thousand to 200,000, possibly 200,000 people could die. And his response to that isn't, oh, we shouldn't do that then. His response to that is, well, if it's going to kill that many people, let's just use a nuke. Do you have one of those ready? Is the question he asked. Do you have one ready? There's still no declaration of war. There's still no congressional action other than funding. And in 1973, of course, Congress passes what's known as the War Powers Act, which essentially takes Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution out of play, the subparagraph which says Congress shall have the power to declare war, and puts it on the president and says, if the president finds. If you're a follower of the show, you know that has become a phrase in the recent weeks and recent days about the real problems with America right now. If the president finds congressional sloughing off of responsibilities and duties that are constitutionally defined. Now, some of those we can accept, but here's a case where the Congress of the United States said, you know what, let's just let the president handle it. If he decides we need to go to war, he's probably in a better position to decide that than we are. But come back in 90 days, 3 months, and tell us how it's going, and we'll decide then if we should continue to fund you or not. Now, before you say that's crazy, well, keep in mind that President Obama, when he was seeking the authorization for use of military force against ISIL, as he called it then, again, it's been redefined as ISIS today, made it clear that he had the authority to act without Congress. He only wanted Congress to go along with him so that it would look like we were all united in this whole thing. That's all he wanted. And if he could get that, then he would be happy. Otherwise, he was just going to do it anyway, and there you go. The War Powers Act was vetoed by President Nixon. President Nixon, who believed that the War Powers Act was unconstitutional because Congress is supposed to declare war, not the president. Sorry, had to drink something there. So he vetoed it. Correctly, in my view. Congress overrode that veto. And now the War Powers Act has been used by some estimates, depending on how you define it, somewhere between 30 and 70 times since 1973. We have literally become a military-industrial complex where we continue to fight wars every time we're turning around, combats every time we're turning around, without ever really considering whether we need to or not. Where's the national security in this? How does this define us? Now, again, I'm the hawk here. I believe that you fight to free people. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is we haven't sat down like Congress did in 1917, in April of 1917, and debated. We haven't talked about it. We haven't argued it. We haven't given the chance for a filibuster. We haven't done any of that. All we've done is say, yeah, go get them, boys. And off go our military kids to do something that may or may not be necessary. We don't really know. The president says it is, but, and I know this will surprise people, but presidents have been known to lie before about a lot of things. And maybe we're just dropping a few cruise missiles on an aspirin factory because, it makes a better story than what was going on in the White House Oval Office. These are things to think about. This is why the framers, when they put this together, they were prescient enough to say, hey, we need to think about these things. And this really bothers me and has bothered me all weekend. Because as I said, Stripes came out with an article over the weekend, and this Monday, today, the Pentagon will deliver to the White House the 30-day review of Islamic strategy. This is a document that is supposed to outline what we're going to do. On January 28th, President Trump ordered the Pentagon to initiate a comprehensive review of its strategies to counter the Islamic State in its strongholds. The review focuses on more than just military action. It includes a review of the diplomatic, cybersecurity, financial operations, and they're going to deliver it today, Monday, will be presented. But here is where I started to get concerned. The military under President Obama, and now under Trump, has relied on a 2001 authorization by Congress to allow military operations against al-Qaeda and its affiliates following the 9/11 terrorist attack. Now, the Pentagon is pushing Congress for authorization of use of military force for a law to grant the president the authority to use the military force against this particular enemy, ISIL. Do you understand the importance of what that means? The Pentagon is asking Congress to push the president to ask Congress for a use of military force that doesn't just say al-Qaeda. We're still operating on the 2001 one, which if you've read it, is a little vague. I don't think it's as vague as we're being told. Remember, President Obama says it gives him authority, but it does say al-Qaeda and its affiliates. Now, the question becomes whether or not you consider ISIS, or ISIL as they call themselves, to be an actual affiliate of al-Qaeda. I'm not sure that they consider themselves that. In fact, I think there's some fundamental differences between the two groups that while they hate the same people, religiously they're not aligned and functionally they're not aligned. But now we find ourselves where rather than debating in the halls of Congress whether or not we go to war, we debate whether we're going to use military force. You know, it's so Orwellian in some ways because we've forgotten in so many ways, I think, what war really is. And when we soften it even further by using the use of military force, well, that could be anything, Dave. It could just be, you know, a cruise missile. It could be a helicopter. It could be anything. War, that's a much deeper word. It implies something much deeper. And even though we've forgotten really what it is, we're all still kind of afraid of it, aren't we? If our Congress said we're going to declare war, we would all be a little bit hesitant, I think, to just go ahead and jump on board. We'd have a lot more public debate about it, wouldn't we, than we have about the use of military force. Oh, sure, you would have the Code Pink folks show up, but you would also have more people involved with this. You would have us thinking about the fact that war means war, folks. It means destruction. It means death. It means tearing infrastructure up. Whereas use of military force just kind of means, you know, we're just kind of bitch slap people until they do what we want them to do. We talk about the billions of dollars, maybe even trillions we've spent in Iraq after 2003. How many of us understand that we went to war in Iraq in 2003 and we blew up that country? We tore things down, and all that stuff had to be rebuilt, and guess who paid for that? We did. These are things that should be considered. And when we start talking about use of military force, authorization for use of military force, I don't think we stop to consider the idea of war. I don't know how we get this back other than we begin to push our representatives that, look, if we're going to go to war, let's go to war. Let's quit pussyfooting around. Let's quit diddling around. Let's quit pretending we're doing stuff. And then when it's out of sight, out of mind, 10,000 miles away on the other side of the earth, nobody really understands what's going on. Nobody really knows what's going on. And maybe it gets reported in the newspaper, maybe it doesn't. When we think in terms of war rather than military force, and I realize it's a very subtle thing, and some of you are going, Dave, it's the same damn thing. Why are you so upset? Because it's not the same thing. When we declare war, we are saying our entire effort as a nation is united and focused on defeating this enemy. When we say we're going to use military force, what we're saying is some people in our country, a very few, less than 2%, are going to sacrifice their family lives, they're going to sacrifice their time, talent, and possibly their lives to go off and try to contain something that might be a threat to us, but we don't really know if it is or not, because we haven't talked about it, we haven't debated it. And this is my concern. President Trump wants to build the military. Great, I'm all for that. But what are we going to do with it? And what are we, the people, going to push our representatives to do? When President Trump, on the advice of the Pentagon, says, hey, I want to use authorization for use of military force against ISIS, what does that include? Are we going to end up in a war in Syria, a ground war in Syria? People are complaining about Afghanistan. People are complaining about Iraq. Now we're going to add Syria to that list? Again, what is the actual national security interest there? These are questions that should be debated in the halls of Congress and aren't being debated because instead we're talking about, well, okay, Mr. President, go ahead and use the force. And that way you don't have to come back in 90 days and get it refunded and get it rediscussed. If you do it that way, you can just go ahead and do whatever you want for as long as you want to do it. And the problem with that theory, folks, is my son's 6 years old. In 12 years, he's going to be old enough to be a part of that. And I'm not sure I want him to be. I want him to serve his country, but not like that. What do you think? 565-DAVE, 565-3283. Take the time right now. Tell the people that matter in your life you love them very much. You'd miss them if they weren't there, so don't pass up those opportunities. You don't want to have that regret.
The Dave Bowman Show is a Slippery Fish Entertainment production for the Podcast 99 Network, Copyright 2017. All rights reserved. For more information or to contact the show, log on to thedavebowmanshow.com. Keep calm, and try SCE2 auxiliary.
Hey, I'm gonna go do something productive. I'm gonna go watch television.